Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here again to really unpack complex research and make it accessible.
That's the goal.
Today, we're putting on our, let's say, sport science hats. We're diving into the really intense physical side of elite soccer training.
Yeah, it's grueling stuff, often unseen.
Exactly. And we're focusing specifically on those really sharp, high-energy movements. You know, the quick stops and starts,
Yeah.
acceleration and deceleration.
ACC, DEC, yeah. Super demanding metabolically and structurally really stressful on the body.
And if you're involved in sports, coaching, playing, managing that load, well, it can be the difference, can it, between performing at your peak and getting injured.
Absolutely crucial.
So the source material for our deep dive today is a really focused piece of research. It's titled The Impact of Weekly Acceleration and Deceleration Loads on Neuromuscular Performance in Soccer, a session-to-session analysis. This was published fairly recently, 2025, in the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine. The authors are Botan, Anqiang, and Yafei Zheng.
Okay, so let's get into the mission of this study. What were they really trying to figure out?
Right.
Well, they spotted this kind of gap in how we monitor players. We use GPS, those vests you see, all the time to track how much players accelerate and decelerate the ACC-DEC load.
Yeah, we get tons of data on that.
Exactly, tons of data. But they realized we don't often connect that specific daily load directly to, well, actual fatigue.
Yeah.
You know, the measurable drop in performance.
Ah, okay. So not just tracking the work, but tracking the effect of that specific day's work.
Precisely. Their goal was to see if a really high volume of ACC-DEC in one training session immediately showed up as fatigue, as neuromuscular impairment in these youth players.
Got it. And how did they go about measuring that?
It was a pretty solid setup, an observational study over 2 weeks. They tracked 39 male players, under 19 outfield players.
So a specific group.
Yeah, specific group. And they used those GNSS monitoring systems, the GPS vests, to capture basically every high-intensity burst.
And the fatigue measures, what were they looking at?
They used a few key things: counter movement jump, or CMJ, for explosive power, hamstring strength, HS, and also, crucially, subjective feedback, delayed onset muscle soreness, DOMS. You know, how sore the players felt.
Okay, CMJ, HS, and DOMS. Got it. So maybe we should start with the basics here, the physics of it. Because acceleration and deceleration, we often say ACC-TEC like it's one thing.
Right.
But physiologically, they're pretty different stresses on the muscles, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. Radically different. When you accelerate, you're mostly using concentric contractions.
Yeah.
The muscle shortens to generate that force to get you moving faster. It's hard work, definitely.
That deceleration.
Deceleration, that's where the real structural stress comes in. To slam on the brakes, you rely heavily on eccentric contractions and also quasi-isometric ones.
Eccentric meaning the muscle is lengthening while it's trying to contract.
Exactly. It's lengthening under massive tension, trying to absorb all that momentum. Think about stopping on a dime. That's intense eccentric load.
And that eccentric loading, that's the real culprit for muscle damage, microtrauma, right?
That's the key insight, yeah. It's not just high force, it's high stress. It dramatically increases the risk of tiny tears in the muscle tissue.
So it's not just about working hard, it's about how the muscle is working.
Precisely. And the researchers pointed out something pretty stark. The eccentric stress during deceleration can actually be up to 65% higher per meter than the stress during acceleration.
Wow, 65% more stress just stopping than starting.
Think about that. You're absorbing significantly more force than you're generating. And that explains why they focus specifically on CMJ and hamstring strength as their performance metrics.
Okay, explain that connection. Why those two metrics specifically, and not just, say, top speed or how far they ran?
Well, they needed measures that are really sensitive to that specific type of eccentric damage. CMJ, the counter movement jump, is perfect because it tests the stretch shortening cycle.
How quickly you can absorb and release energy.
Exactly, how efficient that whole process is. Eccentric damage really messes with that cycle, so your explosive power drops off.
Okay. And hamstring strength?
HS is even more direct, especially for soccer. It measures the muscle's ability to produce force when it's already compromised by that eccentric stress. Think about sprinting, then quickly decelerating or changing direction. Huge hamstring load. Weakness there, especially under eccentric conditions, is a major risk factor for hamstring strains.
Which are obviously a huge problem in soccer.
Huge. So CMJ and HS give you a window into how that deceleration load has impacted function.
Okay, so we've got the mechanism eccentric stress from deceleration is tough. Now, how did the training week actually look in this study? How did the coaches structure it?
It followed a pretty standard pattern, a competitive microcycle, basically planning the week relative to the next match day, or MD.
Right, so you see MD5, MD4, counting down to the game.
Exactly. And the typical idea is to put the heaviest mechanical load early in the week, give the players time to recover.
So MD5, MD4, those would be the tough days.
That's the plan. High-intensity stuff, small-sided games, maybe conditioning drills, really push the mechanical output. Then, as you get closer to the match, MD3, MD2, MD1, the load should taper off.
Less physical stress, more tactics, recovery.
Tactical work, set pieces, maybe some light activation, lower load stuff.
So that was the plan. Did the actual data, the GNSS tracking, back that up? Did the high ACC to EC numbers land where the coaches intended?
Yeah, for the most part, it lined up pretty well. The data was quite clear, actually. The absolute highest number of accelerations and decelerations happened on MD4, 4 days out from the match.
Okay, peak load on MD4, what were the numbers like?
The average was about 44 accelerations and just under 44 decelerations, around 43.65. So quite symmetrical, interestingly.
And the day before, MD5.
That was the second highest load day. Still pretty high, around 38 accelerations and nearly 39 decelerations.
So the heavy lifting was definitely concentrated early to midweek.
Definitely. And then, crucially, the numbers dropped off significantly as they moved towards MD2 and MD1. So in terms of scheduling the volume of these intense actions, the periodizations seemed to work as intended.
Okay, so the load peaked on MD4. But here's the interesting question. Did the players' actual performance, their ability to jump and generate force, follow that same pattern? Or did the fatigue start building up earlier?
Right. This is where we look at the neuromuscular performance data, the CMJ and HS results. And what they found was, well, the fatigue was pretty relentless.
How so?
They found significant drops in both CMJ and hamstring strength after every single training session they measured. Every day.
Wow, so players were leaving the pitch weaker than they started every single day.
Functionally weaker, yes. The acute effect of each session was measurable fatigue.
And what about the cumulative effect? Were they starting the sessions already tired from the days before?
Absolutely. That came through loud and clear. If you look at the pre-training measurements, how strong they were before the session started, both CMJ and HS showed a progressive decline from the start of the week right through to MD4.
So they were walking onto the pitch on MD4 already at their lowest point functionally.
Pretty much, yeah. Their baseline capacity was eroded day by day leading up to that point.
Okay, so the cumulative stress built up. When did the actual biggest drop within a session happen? Where was the peak impairment?
The largest acute drop, the difference between pre-training and post-training performance, was observed on MD4 and also MD5.
Interesting. MD5 as well, even though the load was slightly lower than MD4.
Yeah. On both those days, MD4 and MD5, the players showed roughly a 7.9% reduction in both CMJ and HS after the session. That's a pretty substantial acute drop.
Almost 8% loss of function after training on those days. That tells you the system was really being pushed, right?
Definitely nearing its limit, you could say.
Now, here's something you mentioned earlier that's really fascinating. The difference between how players feel and how they actually perform. The subjective versus objective fatigue.
Yes, the DOMS data versus the CMJ-HS data.
MD4 and MD5 showed the biggest objective drop in function. But when did the players report feeling the most sore?
That's the disconnect. The DOMS ratings, their perceived muscle soreness, actually peaked significantly earlier. It hit its highest point on MD3.
MD3, so midweek.
Right. So the feeling of general soreness built up and peaked midweek, but their actual measurable ability to produce explosive force didn't hit rock bottom until a day or two later on MD4 and MD5.
That's a really important point for coaches, isn't it? Relying solely on asking a player, how do you feel on MD4 might be misleading.
It absolutely could be.
Yeah.
The player might genuinely say, yeah, I feel a bit better than yesterday, because that peak DOMS feeling from MD3 has slightly subsided.
The under the hood.
Exactly.
Huh.
Under the hood, objectively, their neuromuscular system is at its most compromised point. Their functional capacity is at its lowest ebb.
So subjective feeling can lag behind or even precede the actual physiological state.
That's what this data suggests. There's often a delay or a mismatch. Oh, and there was another interesting little detail about MD5.
What was that?
Even though MD5 showed that big 7.9% post-training drop, the pre-training values, so how they started the session, had actually bounced back slightly compared to MD4.
Ah, so they started MD5 a tiny bit better than they started MD4.
Just a little.
Yeah.
Which suggests that maybe the lighter session content plan for MD5 maybe more activation, less heavy load, allowed some initial recovery to begin, even while the session itself still induced significant fatigue. It might have prevented a complete crash before the match.
Okay, interesting nuance. But this all leads us to the absolute core finding of the study, the really surprising part.
Yeah, this is the big one.
We know MD4 had the highest load, the most accelerations and decelerations. The logical assumption would be that that high volume directly caused the big 7.9% performance drop measured on that same day.
That's what you'd intuitively think. More hard work today equals more fatigue measured today.
But was that the case?
No. Plain and simple, no. This is the crucial finding. The researchers found no statistically significant correlation between the number of accelerations or decelerations done on any given day and the size of the acute performance dropped that post-pre difference in CMJ or HS on that same day.
Wow. No correlation at all across any training day.
Across any training day they monitored in those 2 weeks, the volume of ACC-DEC in a single session did not predict the immediate functional fatigue measured after that session.
Okay, that really challenges how a lot of people might think about daily load monitoring, doesn't it? If just counting the ACC-DEC number for today doesn't tell you how fatigued the player will be after today's session, what does that mean?
It suggests that simply looking at that daily volume number in isolation is, well, insufficient. It doesn't give you the full picture of immediate readiness or functional decline.
So what is driving that big drop on MD4 and MD5 then, if not the load from that specific day?
The findings strongly point towards the cumulative effect. It's not about the stress of the last hour. It's about the buildup of stress over the preceding days, the chronic load.
The fatigue debt they're carrying into the session.
Exactly. And likely other factors, too, that weren't the primary focus here. ACC-DEC are just one piece of the puzzle.
What other factors might be playing a role in that cumulative decline?
Well, you have to think about overall metabolic stress, which isn't perfectly captured just by counting stops and starts. Things like total distance covered, especially high-speed running volume.
Right, high-speed running causes different kinds of strain.
Different physiological demands, different types of tissue stress, plus the specific types of drills used matter. Small-sided games versus conditioning runs, for example.
So the ACC-DC count is important, but it's interacting with this background level of fatigue.
That seems to be the case. When the body is already tired, already carrying the weight of, say, 3 days of significant eccentric stress, the specific number of decelerations you do today might matter less than the fact that the whole system is just generally compromised and vulnerable.
You mentioned the researchers did spot a little something on MD5, though. Not significant, but a trend?
Yeah, they noted some moderate but not statistically significant negative correlations on MD5. Around R equals 0.30 to gamma 0.32, if I remember correctly.
Meaning?
Meaning there was a hint that on that day, when cumulative fatigue was likely peaking, a higher number of accelerations or decelerations might have been slightly associated with a larger acute performance drop.
So maybe when you're already running on empty, then the day's specific load starts to have a more direct, measurable impact?
It suggests that possibility, yeah. Pushing high mechanical loads late in the week when the players are already maximally fatigued from the chronic buildup might be particularly risky for causing that significant acute decline. It's the timing and the interaction that seem critical.
Okay, so wrapping this all together. For the coaches, the S&C staff, the physios listening, what's the big practical takeaway from this deep dive into Tan Hu and Zheng's work?
I think the main message is about understanding the cumulative nature of fatigue and that disconnect between load and immediate impairment.
Right. So periodizing the load, putting the high ACC-DEC work on MD4, that might be structurally sound planning.
Yes, it gets the volume done early.
But you have to recognize that MD4 and MD5 are still likely the days where the players are objectively at their most vulnerable functionally because of the work done on MD4 and the days before it.
Exactly. The objective fatigue peaks then, even if the soreness peaked earlier, and even if that day's specific ACC-DEC volume isn't the sole driver.
Yeah.
Managing recovery around those midweek days becomes absolutely paramount.
Yeah.
You need to be aware the engine is running low, even if the dashboard warning light for soreness isn't flashing quite as brightly.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
And of course, we need to acknowledge the study's limitations. It was a relatively small group, just U19 males, only tracked for 2 weeks.
True. Context is important.
And they only used 2 trials for the CMJ and HS tests, which some might argue isn't ideal. But the findings definitely raise important questions for future research.
Like needing to integrate more factors.
Absolutely. We need models that pull in high-speed running, maybe some metabolic markers, total distance, maybe even non-training stressors like sleep or academics for these youth players to get a truly holistic view of what drives neuromuscular fatigue. ACC-DEC counts are necessary information, but they're clearly not sufficient on their own.
Okay. Before we wrap up, do you have one final provocative thought for our listeners to chew on based on this?
Okay. How about this? Think about that eccentric loading, the deceleration stress. We know the muscle damage it causes often doesn't fully manifest functionally for 24, 48, even 72 hours.
The delayed onset muscle soreness idea, but applied to performance.
Kind of. It means the objective drop in performance you measure today might not actually be the result of today's training session, but rather the delayed consequence of the heavy eccentric load you put the players through 2 or even 3 days ago.
So the fatigue clock is always running behind the training clock.
In a way, yes,
Yeah.
especially for that eccentric component. What you measure today could be yesterday's or the day before yesterday's stress finally catching up. It adds another layer of complexity to interpreting daily monitoring data.
That concept of a delayed fatigue impact is definitely something to think about. It reinforces that key finding, the disconnect between the daily load number and the immediate performance drop.
Precisely.
Well, this has been incredibly insightful. We strongly encourage everyone listening, if you want all the specific numbers and statistical details, to check out the full article by Tan, Hu, and Zheng in the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine.
Definitely worth the read.
If you found this deep dive helpful, please make sure you follow our channel, turn on notifications, all that good stuff, so you don't miss our next exploration of complex science made simple.
Thanks for tuning in.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.